Hello, confirmands. It is good to see you. I hope you are well. Just remember that we are on our Lenten schedule now. So this is lesson 20 of year 2. The lesson is miracles, healing the blind and the deaf. But the schedule is different than at other times in the year. Right? Soup supper starts at 5:30. You should come. Who doesn't want free soup and bread and crackers and about 19 different kinds of treats? You should absolutely come to that. You don't have to, but you should. And then at 6:30, we gather in the sanctuary at Nelsonville to do our in-person discussion group. After that, there's church at 7 o'clock, and you're out of there by 7:30. Nothing changes for the online kids. I'll see you at 8 o'clock online, but you should be trying to get into a Lenten service as well. Wherever it is that you live, there's a church near you doing midweek Lenten services, and you should be there. Just another reminder for kids who are local, kids who are part of the Tomorrow River Parish, that for Lent only, there is a special deal in effect that if you go to the Thursday night candlelight services at Nelsonville, you get double worship attendance credit. You go, there's a book in the back there by the organ, and you can sign in twice for every candlelight service that you come to. And for some of you, that's going to be a real helpful thing because there aren't a lot of sign-ins so far this year for you, and this will let you catch up in an easier fashion. So those are the announcements. Again, we're going to talk about Jesus healing the deaf and the blind. There are 4 stories that we're going to look at today. Your homework, you should ask questions about any of these stories. As always, you can also ask other questions about the faith, but I want you to understand this. The healing of the deaf and the blind, there's other things to see there. Remember, John's Gospel says that Jesus does the miracles he does so that we can come to believe that he is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that through him we might have life. But there's something a little bit extra about healing the blind and the deaf. First, no one else could do it in Jesus' day, right? There was no healing for it. For people born blind now, there's still, it's very difficult to restore sight because it's not just your eyes that have to work, but your brain has to be wired over time to understand what it is that you're looking at. So these miracles would still be considered miraculous today, even with all of our advancements in technology and science. And there's something that's kind of cool about Jesus opening people who couldn't do something for themselves, helping them hear who he was, helping them see who he was. There's something there that we shouldn't miss, that Jesus does for us what we can't do for ourselves, that Jesus starts the relationship with us. We don't start the relationship. And, Jesus is just dreadfully clear about this. At one point he says, I'm the vine and you are the branches. Without me, you can do nothing. Right? That everything we have comes from Jesus. Everything we believe is a grace given to us by Jesus. Jesus opens the ears of the deaf and the eyes of the blind, and he opens the hearts of people like you and me. And all that's connected as we go through these stories. So the phrase that pays this week, golly, it's long. It's got to be 600 words, right? So you might have to pause the video a couple of times and make sure you got it. Go back 10 seconds and listen again. The first part of the phrase that pays, what is it to serve God and to do his will? ? What is it to serve God and to do his will? All right. Our first story of Jesus healing the deaf or the blind comes from Mark 8. They, that's the disciples and Jesus, came to Bethsaida. Some people brought a blind man to him and begged him to touch him. He took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. And when he had put saliva on his eyes and laid his hands on him, he asked him, "Can you see anything?" And the man looked up and said, "I can see people, but they look like trees walking." Then Jesus laid his hands on his eyes again, and he looked intently, and his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. Then he sent him away to his home, saying, do not even go into the village. So there's there's a lot here to see, and I hope you'll have questions. And I'm just going to touch a few little things on each story because I want to give you the chance to think through things yourself. Right? So Jesus isn't looking for a public spectacle. He takes the guy out of the village, and after he heals him, he sends him home. So don't even go into the village. That Jesus has a mercy that's unlike our mercy. If we're going to do something cool, we want as many people to see it as possible, right? That's not Jesus' bag at all. Jesus wanted to do good for this guy, but he didn't want any notoriety. He didn't want any acclaim, right? And then the healing is really odd among Jesus' miracles because it comes in phases. And I think that Jesus could have healed him just like that, right? But it's kind of cool that Jesus heals him in phases because that's kind of how it's working in my life. That Jesus will show me something and I think I understand it, but it's a little fuzzy, and then he'll show me it again and it's a little clearer. I wish that I could tell you that I've reached the point where I see clearly. No, but the phases thing rings really, really true to me. And so you think about that. The next 37 words of the phrase that pays are this: nothing else than to show mercy to our neighbor, period. Nothing else than to show mercy to our neighbor, period. All right, second story. A little story from Mark 10. They, the disciples and Jesus, came to Jericho. As he and his disciples and a large group were leaving Jericho, Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus, a blind beggar, was sitting by the roadside. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout out and say, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. Many sternly ordered him to be quiet, but he cried out even more loudly, Son of David, have mercy on me. Jesus stood still and said, call him here. And they called the blind man, saying to him, take heart, get up, he is calling you. So throwing off his cloak, he sprang up and came to Jesus. Then Jesus said to him, what do you want me to do for you? The blind man said to him, my teacher, let me see again. Jesus said to him, go, your faith has made you well. Immediately he regained his sight and followed him on the way. Well, that's a cool story too, right? For some different reasons, right? This guy had once seen and he'd lost his sight. He says to Jesus, make me see again. He knows who Jesus is in a way that other people don't, right? Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. That he knows that Jesus is the Messiah. In his blindness, he sees stuff that other people with sight can't see, can't understand. That's pretty cool too. The healing is, again, just no fuss, no muss. Like we talked about that Jesus could have done with the first guy. Jesus just says, go, your faith has made you well. That's pretty cool. That Jesus, doesn't have to touch him, doesn't have to do any magic incantations. Jesus is really in charge. And he's got more power than we had thought he has. The blind man leaping up and coming to Jesus. There's something really cool in that. Blind people generally move very carefully, right? But this guy is all in. And when he gets in front of Jesus, he's not going to waste his shot with the king. Jesus says, what do you want? He could have said, I'd like some help, financially. Can you spare anything? I'd like some food. I'm kind of hungry. I'd like to ask you a few questions. No, he goes right for the top of the mountain. I want to see again. I know who you are. It's a really cool story. Let's talk about it on Wednesday night. The next 408 words of the phrase that pays. I know, your hand, it's got to be so painful, and I'm a really bad person for this kind of length in the phrase that pays, right? For it is our own neighbor who needs our service, semicolon. You know what a semicolon is, right? Come on. For it is our own neighbor who needs our service. All right, from John 9. This is a long story. And so, I'm going to touch proportionally fewer pieces. But boy, this is cool. As he walked along, Jesus, he saw a man blind from birth. So again, not easy to heal, not even for the most modern medical sciences. The disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus answered, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming and when no one can work. As long as I am the world, I am the light of the world." Right? So the disciples ask one question. There must be a reason that this guy was blind, right? They want the world to make sense, right? He must have sinned. His parents must have sinned. You know, why is he being punished with such a hard life? And Jesus is saying that's not how it works at all. He was born blind so that God's glory could be revealed in him. And then Jesus uses that opportunity to make one of the great claims about who he is. I am the light of the world, right? And you know, the I am the light of the world. Remember what God's holy name is when God speaks to Moses from the burning bush? I am. Jesus here takes God's holy name and puts it on himself. I am the light of the world. That is just shocking. Right? I mean, the people around him, some of them wanted to stone him to death for blasphemy, for taking on the prerogatives of God, even though he was only a human being. And then, you know, we're talking about a guy who's blind, and Jesus says, "I'm the light of the world," and then he goes to work healing him so that the light fills this guy who has never seen the light before. Someone born in darkness, who's lived in darkness, and the light of the world comes to him and it opens, right? So when Jesus said this, he spat on the ground and made mud with the saliva and spread the mud on the man's eyes, saying to him, "Go and wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. Then he went and he washed and he came back able to see. The neighbors and those who'd seen him before as a beggar began to ask, "Is not this the man who used to sit and beg?" Some were saying, "It's he." Others were saying, "No, it's someone like him." He kept saying, "I'm the man." But they kept asking him, "Well, how then were your eyes opened?" He answered, "The man called Jesus made mud, spread it on my eyes, and said to me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' Then I went and washed and received my sight." They said to him, "Well, where is he?" He said, "I don't know." They brought to the Pharisees the man who'd been formerly blind. Now, it was a Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes, and the Pharisees also began to ask him how he'd received his sight. He said to them, "He put mud on his eyes, and I washed, and now I see." Some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, for he does not observe the Sabbath." But others said, "How can a man who's a sinner perform such signs?" And they were divided. So they said again to the blind man, "What do you say about him? It was your eyes he opened." He said, "He is a prophet." The Jews did not believe that he had been blind and received his sight until they called the parents of the man who'd received his sight. And he asked them, "Is this your son who you say was born blind? How does he now see?" His parents answered, "We know it's our son and that he was born blind, but we do not know how it is that now he sees, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him, he is of age, he will speak for himself." Now his parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that anyone who confessed Jesus to be the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. Therefore his parents said, "He's of age, ask him." So for the second time they called the man who'd been blind, and they said to him, "Give glory to God. We know this man is a sinner." He answered, "I don't know whether he's a sinner. One thing I do know, though, is that I was blind and now I see." They said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered them, "I've already told you, and you wouldn't listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you all want to become his disciples?" Then they reviled him, saying, "You're his disciple, but we're disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he comes from." The man answered, "Well, here's an astonishing thing. You don't know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God doesn't listen to sinners, but he does listen to ones who worship him and obey his will. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." They answered him, "You were born entirely a sin, and you're trying to teach us?" And they drove him out. Now Jesus heard that they'd driven him out, and when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He answered, "And who is he, sir? Tell me so that I may believe in him." Jesus said, "You have seen him, and the one speaking with you is he." He said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshiped him. Jesus said, "I came into the world for judgment, so that those who do not see may see, and those who see may become blind." Some of the Pharisees near heard this and said to him, "Surely we are not blind, are we?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would have no sin. But now that you say we see, your sin remains." It is such a cool story. I mean, the attitudes that are captured in it, I mean, it is just glorious. It is so well written. There you got history and machinations and politics that sometimes pops up in religion. There is so much there that we can talk about, and I hope that you go through the thing carefully and that you have really good questions. But I hope you see that this person who took God's holy name on himself and then said he was the light of the world, he opened the world to this guy. And I hope you see that when the guy got driven out, Jesus went and found him. So again, Jesus does the work of healing him, and then Jesus does the work of finding him again. There's stuff in here to talk about healing on the Sabbath. There's stuff in here, I'm sure, that someone's going to ask me about making mud out of saliva, because spit was in the first story too. But there's just an awful lot here, and God bless you as you think about it. The next part of the phrase that pays: God in heaven needs it not, period. God in heaven needs it not, period. And again, as is our recent custom, this is a saying of Martin Luther. From Mark 7. Then Jesus returned from the region of Tyre and went by way of Sidon toward the Sea of Galilee, in the region of the Decapolis. They brought to him a deaf man who had an impediment in his speech, and they begged him to lay his hand on him. He took him aside in private, away from the crowd, put his fingers into his ears, he spat and touched his tongue. Then looking up at heaven, he sighed and said to him, "Ephphatha," that is, "be opened." That's Aramaic, by the way. And immediately his ears were opened and his tongue was released, and he spoke plainly. Then Jesus ordered them to tell no one, but the more he ordered them, the more zealously they proclaimed it. They were astounded beyond measure, saying, "He has done everything well. He even makes the deaf to hear and the mute to speak." Right? So again, it's another story of Jesus taking the initiative, having mercy on someone, wanting to help someone, wanting it to be private, away from the crowds, not looking for notoriety, right? And that Jesus does everything necessary to open this person and to set him free, to give him a life, well, that he could never have imagined before, right? So that's one of the commonalities of these stories. I am thrilled to be your confirmation teacher and looking forward to talking to you on March 8th. Remember, online people, get your stuff into me by the 7th. That helps me a lot. In-person people, I will see you at the Soup Supper or at confirmation on March 8th at Nelsonville. That's right. You take care. Bye-bye.